Imagine a stunning young doctor who puts on her white coat every day, not to save lives, but to extinguish hope. She smiles politely in front of Nazi officers, but once the doors of the experiment room close, innocent young women become test subjects. Their suffering forever etched into history's darkest pages. How could a doctor, someone sworn to heal, become the very source of pain no medical science could ever justify? We will dive into her past, her ambition, her deceptive smile, and how she weaponized beauty as the perfect disguise for evil. Stay until the end, because the most terrifying truth isn't what she did, but why she enjoyed it. This is not just the story of a doctor. It is a warning that monsters don't always look like monsters.
Welcome back, history investigators, to our archive room. Today, we're not just digging through data. We're trying to solve one of humanity's most disturbing puzzles. How does goodness rot into unforgivable evil? Look at this face, a charming smile, eyes filled with promise and ambition. If you had met her back then, you might have said, "She's perfect. Her future is bright." Her name? Herta Oberheuser. She wasn't a politician. She wasn't a general. She was a doctor, a woman sworn to save lives. And yet, history remembers her not as a healer, but as a monster hiding behind a white coat. The question we will investigate today is simple, but deeply unsettling. Did ambition and social pressure create the monster behind this smile?
Let's begin with our first clue, the year she was born. Herta entered the world in Germany in 1911. Remember that year carefully. It was a time of transition, the aftermath of World War I, political chaos, and the rising tide of nationalism and propaganda slowly seeping into every household. Herta did not come from a wealthy family. This is a crucial detail. For a woman in that era, rising above her social class was an extraordinary struggle. And for Herta, there was only one golden ticket to climb the ladder: medicine, the most prestigious path of all. Records paint a picture of her: bright, charming, ambitious, obsessed with becoming someone, with being recognized. Imagine this, investigators. In those days, a woman becoming a doctor in Germany was a bold statement. She was a pioneer, a supposed role model for future generations. She graduated in 1937, right at the height of a regime preaching the ideology of racial perfection. And here lies the heart of our mystery. We have a brilliant young woman chasing a noble dream, but doing so inside an ideological machine that was quietly, relentlessly corrupting her morality.
Now, let's analyze the evidence. After graduating, Herta Oberheuser faced a career-defining choice. Where could a young, ambitious doctor gain validation and climb the ranks the fastest? The answer: the uniform.
In 1937, she joined the League of German Women, a branch of the regime's youth organizations. At first glance, this step may have seemed harmless, perhaps simply a way to build connections. But in 1940, she took a step from which there was no turning back. She became a resident doctor at a dermatology clinic in Dresden. Soon after, she was recruited and transferred into a project the regime considered a scientific dream: human experimentation. This is the key point, investigators. Historical records indicate that Herta chose this path willingly. She viewed it as a golden opportunity, a fast track to a secure and respected career, a shortcut fueled by ambition. She didn't stumble into darkness. She walked toward it.
Let's return to the image we began with. A young doctor, cheerful, charming, seemingly perfect. And yet, at the very same moment, she was already walking a path that would shatter that image of perfection forever. A path where she would no longer heal, but inflict suffering. This journey, from an ambitious medical student in Dresden, would lead her straight to the gates of hell, a concentration camp filled entirely with women. We've seen her beginnings. We've seen her ambition. But now, investigators, we face a chilling question. What happens when obsession collides with ideology? How does a smiling, sociable doctor become someone who calmly injects bacteria, glass, and foreign objects into the bodies of other women? Our next clue takes us directly to Ravensbrück, the camp where this smile ended and where the darkness of Herta Oberheuser truly began. Let's leave Herta Oberheuser in Dresden for a moment, standing at the crossroads of her career. Remember, investigators, ambition was her currency. In Germany of the 1930s, if you wanted power, prestige, and unlimited access to medical resources, there was no institution more influential than the Schutzstaffel, the SS. And in 1940, Herta made a decision that went far beyond professional advancement. She joined the SS. Here comes the provocative question at the core of our investigation. Did she truly believe in the ideology, or did she simply allow darkness to flow in as the price for authority? Evidence from the archives points to a chilling answer. Both. The SS offered Oberheuser more than a job. They offered status. In a male-dominated hierarchy, a female doctor with a medical degree was a rare anomaly, and a highly valuable one. The regime saw her as the perfect propaganda symbol, a young, intelligent woman meeting the Aryan ideal, wearing a white lab coat while serving the national mission. She was the walking image of the perfection they wanted the world to see. Let's dissect her motives. On one side, by joining the SS, Herta gained extraordinary power within the medical world. She now had the ability to conduct research,
secure funding, and rise to prominence without being overshadowed by the more established male physicians. It was the fast track to influence she had dreamed of since her modest upbringing. On the other side, that decision came with an ideological price. The SS stood at the front lines of the doctrine of Aryan racial superiority. It is impossible to believe that a trained physician did not understand who she was joining and for what purpose. Herta Oberheuser showed interest in this ideology, or at the very least, she mastered the art of appearing devoted to it. Because once you are inside, ideology becomes your license to act. A license to decide who deserves to live and who does not. So, our provisional conclusion, investigators, is this. Herta allowed her ambition to sanctify the ideology. She didn't merely accept its doctrines, she weaponized them as rungs on the ladder she wanted to climb. She willingly betrayed the oath she swore as a doctor in exchange for power and prestige. Now, the SS had given Herta the position she wanted. They had granted her authority, and with that authority came an assignment to a place populated entirely by women, where she would be free to conduct research without any moral boundaries. That place was Ravensbrück concentration camp. When we step through its gates in our next episode, we will witness a female physician, a woman we already know as ambitious and outwardly charming, performing acts that defy all reason. Because if success was all she wanted, why were her experiments carried out not with cold detachment, but with a disturbing enthusiasm recorded by survivors? At Ravensbrück, we will uncover more than darkness. We will uncover a chilling enjoyment in cruelty. And that, investigators, is a mystery far deeper than ambition alone. We have entered the most difficult phase of the investigation. We have seen Herta Oberheuser's ambition. We have seen how she embraced the SS. Now, within the walls of Ravensbrück concentration camp, we will witness the results of this fusion of ambition and ideology. Ravensbrück was no ordinary camp. It was a camp designed and inhabited exclusively by women. And here, Herta Oberheuser, a female doctor who was supposed to be a protector, twisted the definition of saving life into organized torture. The doctor's oath she once swore had become a tool. A doctor was supposed to heal, but she instead created wounds that were never meant to heal. Identifying the victims is our priority. Oberhauser's victims were a group of young Polish women, mostly political prisoners, whom the SS gave the chilling nickname Kaninchen, or Rabbit's Foot. Approximately 74 women were the subjects of his experiments. They were not patients seeking a cure. They were material for a research project officially labeled Sealing War Wounds. The ideology was simple. SS soldiers and Germans on the front lines were often seriously injured. Nazi doctors wanted to know the quickest and best way to heal infected wounds. However, investigators noticed one fundamental difference. Oberheuser and his colleagues didn't heal wounds, they created them. Let's look at the evidence. These experiments were cruel surgical procedures performed with no regard for pain or life. The prisoners were bound, and anesthesia, if administered, was merely a formality, often insufficient or even omitted altogether. Step 1, creating the wound. Oberheuser would make a deep incision through the muscle and bone of the lower leg. This was torture. Step 2, the injection of cruelty. This was the most horrific part. To simulate the filth of a battlefield, Oberheuser deliberately introduced various foreign materials and pathogens into the fresh wound. Bacteria, such as streptococcus and gangrene, to trigger acute infection. Glass fragments and sand to create a contaminated wound that was difficult to clean. Bone fragments from one prisoner's leg would be transplanted to the other. Imagine the stabbing pain, the burning infection, all witnessed consciously by a doctor sworn to protect.
And here we return to the fundamental question. She understood human anatomy, so she clearly knew the pain it would cause. She knew these infections would lead to suffering, amputation, or death. Why did she persist? The answer isn't simply ideology or ambition. That would be too simplistic. The evidence points to a kind of total dehumanization. In Herta Oberheuser days, these Polish women were no longer human. They were specimens, biological vessels, disposable tools to advance her regime's career and scientific knowledge. Perhaps behind her smile, the darkness had reached a point where the pain of others no longer sparked empathy, but rather a cold, scientific curiosity. She wanted to see how far the human body could endure before giving up. This was no longer medical malpractice. This was a celebration of sadism, disguised as scientific legitimacy. Investigators, the horror isn't over. The rabbit's foot experiment was only the beginning. Herta Oberheuser wasn't content with simply creating an infection. She also had to ensure that these terminally ill specimens wouldn't reveal anything about what happened at Ravensbrück. We'll delve into Oberhauser's chosen solution for the remaining victims. We'll see how she took her final step, one that defined her as the Grim Reaper in medical history. Don't miss it. We'll unravel the archives of Herta Oberhauser's death. We have established, investigators, that Herta Oberheuser was a perpetrator. But let's delve into the psychological level. How did she choose her victims? And why did she go beyond what the cruel scientific protocol required? In Ravensbrück, the Polish women had a more specific nickname, one that signified their suffering: rabbit girls. This nickname arose not only because they were experimented on like laboratory rabbits, but because their feet, the primary area of experimentation, were subjected to the cruelty. Wounds were deliberately inflicted, infected, and in many cases their leg bones were broken in stages, as if to ensure permanent damage. Evidence suggests that after the deliberate infections failed to heal, Oberheuser would proceed with staged amputations, an excruciatingly painful process, often to prevent death, but ultimately leaving the victims severely disfigured. Now, let's ask a provocative question that straddles the line between science and sadism. Was this science or sadism disguised as medical discovery? The most disturbing accounts come from survivor testimonies. They noted a pattern. Herta Oberheuser chose specific victims, not at random. She often targeted prisoners considered young and beautiful. Remember Oberheuser's background. From a poor family, she used her medical degree and her own beauty to rise in status, becoming an SS propaganda asset. She was a woman obsessed with an image of perfection and power that she fought tooth and nail for.
Investigators strongly suspect that behind her white coat and scientific claims, there was a personal jealousy that fueled her brutal methods. The beauty she used to charm others and gain power, she now used to rob others of their beauty. If the motive were purely scientific, why was there a need to insert broken glass? Why staged amputations? Why the insistence on seeing how much suffering could be endured? In the context of post-war trials, Oberheuser insisted that he was simply following orders to achieve medical discovery. However, the victims' testimonies were far more personal. They remembered his expressions. They remembered his laughter during painful procedures. They remembered the touch of his cold hands, devoid of any trace of empathy. This was no longer about experiments. This was about the absolute power a female doctor wielded over another woman's body. The power to take away their hopes, their futures, and even their beauty. Our psychological evidence concludes science was merely a cover. The core was sadism, fueled by jealousy and legitimized by SS ideology.
Herta Oberheuser, the angel of death at Ravensbrück, had completed the darkest part of her work. She had inflicted horrific wounds, and in her mind, she had eliminated the threat of women she perceived as rivaling her beauty or threatening her status. But, investigators, this story is not over. History has its own way of demanding accountability. After the war, how could a female doctor who committed these unimaginable atrocities sit in the dock trying to convince the world that she was merely a victim of the system she so passionately served? The question now shifts: is the justice system capable of punishing such a personal and multi-layered darkness? Investigators, we have seen what Herta Oberheuser did behind closed doors in Ravensbrück. But to fully understand this monster, we must see how she behaved outside of that darkness. This is the most disturbing subtopic of our investigation. A split personality so extreme that she managed to deceive her surroundings, even herself. By day, she was a predator who sliced open prisoners. By night, or in the presence of her superior officers, she was the graceful white angel. According to accounts and testimonies from SS officers who served at Ravensbrück, Herta Oberheuser's image among her colleagues was a far cry from the butcher we know. She was described as polite, friendly, and highly competent. Her SS superiors frequently praised her professionalism and appearance. In the harsh, male-dominated military environment, she was a calming beacon of hope. This was her greatest adaptation strategy. She knew how to play the part. Herta Oberheuser was part of the camp's elite social scene. She loved parties, and she loved the attention she received from the male officers. Her medical degree, her Aryan beauty, and her white coat were the perfect disguise for concealing her dirty work. Now, let's solve this psychological puzzle. How can a woman smile so sweetly after having just cut open a person's body? There are two psychological defense mechanisms at work here. First, dehumanization. In the laboratory, prisoners are rabbit girls, specimens, not human beings. This allows for a complete disconnect between brutal medical treatment and empathy. Second, dissociation. This is the mechanism that allows her to lock the atrocities of Ravensbrück inside a mental box. When she leaves the operating room, she becomes another Herta, a graceful socialite, seeking validation from the officers. In her mind, there is no moral conflict. The cruel act is a state-sanctioned professional responsibility, while her smile is a social responsibility to maintain her status. These two roles never meet.
Consider this, investigators, especially those of you working in competitive professional environments. Oberheuser demonstrated extraordinary skills of social manipulation. He knew that image is everything. In Ravensbrück, he was the prototype of the toxic professional. He used his status to harm the weak, and then used his charm to advance his career among the powerful. He successfully created an image of innocence, as the white angel could not be the devil. This complex psychology is what made his case so difficult to understand and later to prosecute. Investigators trying to understand the unimaginable. We have seen what Herta Oberheuser did behind closed doors in Ravensbrück. But to fully understand this monster, we must see how she behaved outside of that darkness. This is the most disturbing subtopic of our investigation. A split personality so extreme that she managed to deceive her surroundings, even herself. By day, she was a predator who sliced open prisoners. By night, or in the presence of her superior officers, she was the graceful white angel. According to accounts and testimonies from SS officers who served at Ravensbrück, Herta Oberheuser's image among her colleagues was a far cry from the butcher we know. She was described as polite, friendly, and highly competent. Her SS superiors frequently praised her professionalism and appearance. In the harsh, male-dominated military environment, she was a calming beacon of hope. This was her greatest adaptation strategy. She knew how to play the part. Herta Oberheuser was part of the camp's elite social scene. She loved parties, and she loved the attention she received from the male officers. Her medical degree, her Aryan beauty, and her white coat were the perfect disguise for concealing her dirty work. Now, let's solve this psychological puzzle. How can a woman smile so sweetly after having just cut open a person's body? There are two psychological defense mechanisms at work here. First, dehumanization. In the laboratory, prisoners are rabbit girls, specimens, not human beings. This allows for a complete disconnect between brutal medical treatment and empathy. Second, dissociation. This is the mechanism that allows her to lock the atrocities of Ravensbrück inside a mental box. When she leaves the operating room, she becomes another Herta, a graceful socialite, seeking validation from the officers. In her mind, there is no moral conflict. The cruel act is a state-sanctioned professional responsibility, while her smile is a social responsibility to maintain her status. These two roles never meet. Consider this, investigators, especially those of you working in competitive professional environments. Oberheuser demonstrated extraordinary skills of social manipulation. He knew that image is everything. In Ravensbrück, he was the prototype of the toxic professional. He used his status to harm the weak, and then used his charm to advance his career among the powerful. He successfully created an image of innocence, as the white angel could not be the devil. This complex psychology is what made his case so difficult to understand and later to prosecute. However, like all predators, Oberheuser's mask eventually had to fall. When the war ended and she was captured by the Allies, the files and testimonies of the rabbit girls began to pile up, shattering the image she had worked so hard to build. As she stood on the stand at the Nuremberg doctor's trial, she could no longer hide her darkness behind a sweet smile. But how would she defend herself? How would a woman who had once been so powerful face justice? If the image of the white angel was a mask she wore for the officers, then Herta Oberheuser's true nature was known only to the rabbit girls who were under her knife. This is where the most damning and horrifying evidence was found, the detainees' notes and testimonies. Investigators, it's not just about what she did, it's about how she did it. The collective testimony of Ravensbrück survivors paints a striking and unified picture of Herta Oberheuser. They recall how her face lit up, even seemed happy as she tortured. One survivor noted, "Her face showed no anger, but a strange pleasure every time she performed a painful procedure." This was no longer about carrying out orders. It was about the pleasure derived from the suffering of others. This transcended ambition and ideology. It was the domain of clinical sadism. But her cruelty was not only physical. She also employed psychological terror. Testimonies describe how Oberheuser would often approach, bend over the suffering victims, and whisper terrifying phrases or threats to them. The purpose of the whispering was clear: to break their spirits, ensuring they felt not only physical pain, but also the absolute fear that no one would come to their rescue. This brings us to the central mystery of Herta Oberheuser's psychology. Did she ever have remorse? Or was her conscience completely numbed? Modern doctors and psychologists explain this as the absence of empathy. Oberheuser's possessions not only suppressed guilt, they seem to have eliminated it. The dehumanization she inflicted on her victims backfired and destroyed her own humanity. When the pain of others gave her pleasure, as sadism, or validation, as successful science, the concept of remorse became irrelevant. Remorse requires an active conscience. Her records and behavior suggest that her conscience had been replaced by obsession, an obsession with power, image, and her experiments. Herta Oberheuser is a case study in how social conditions, ambition, and ideology can undermine a medical professional's moral boundaries. Investigators, we have traced her ambitious youth. We have witnessed the horrors of her experiments. We have understood her terrifying duality. Now we must confront the most crucial question. All monsters were once human. But at what point did Herta Oberheuser cease to be human? The answer may not be in the archives, but in the courtroom. A courtroom where she will have to answer for every cut, every whisper, and every cruel smile. Investigators believe the regime that granted Herta Oberheuser absolute power has finally collapsed. With the end of World War II, the facade of the White Angel has also been shattered. From her prestigious position as an SS doctor, Herta Oberheuser is now nothing more than a fugitive. In 1945, she was captured by the Allies. Her status changed from propaganda asset to prime suspect in medical war crimes. This was the moment when the truth finally spoke. The voices of the rabbit girls, silenced by her in Ravensbrück, now echoed around the world. Herta Oberheuser was neither a politician nor a general. She was one of 23 defendants tried in the Nuremberg doctors' trial, officially known as the medical case, which took place from 1946 to 1947. This trial was a pivotal moment in legal history, explicitly aimed at punishing crimes committed in the name of science and medicine. In the courtroom stood the regime's leading doctors, and among them, the only woman on trial, Herta Oberheuser. She had to listen to heartbreaking testimony about the wounds she had inflicted, the glass shards she had implanted, and her cold smile. When given the opportunity to defend himself, Oberheuser employed the same narrative used by many Nazi defendants. He tried to blame superior orders. His defense argued that he was simply a young, ambitious doctor trapped within the military system.
obligated to carry out the prescribed procedures. He argued that he had no choice. But investigators, we return to the ultimate moral question. Is following orders enough to excuse such a grave sin? The prosecution flatly rejected this defense. The evidence showed that Oberheuser not only followed orders, but he enthusiastically carried them out, even going beyond protocol with his own personal sadism, as confirmed by the prisoner's records. Oberheuser possessed medical expertise. He knew full well the consequences of his actions. No order requires a doctor to beam with joy at inflicting suffering. In the eyes of the law, he violated every code of medical ethics. After hearing all the evidence, the doctor's court ruled. Herta Oberheuser was found guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity. She was not sentenced to death. That sentence was handed down to several of her colleagues, but she received a 20-year prison sentence. This sentence sent a clear message to the world. Personal moral responsibility trumps superior authority. A professional, especially a doctor, must uphold his or her conscience. However, investigators, even after the verdict, still had a final question hanging. Did she actually serve her full sentence? Despite being sentenced to 20 years, Herta Oberheuser didn't spend 2 decades in prison. She was released early in 1952. But did freedom mean the end of her story? How did she live the rest of her life? And most importantly, what is the lasting legacy of a doctor who betrayed her profession? We will conclude this investigation with Herta Oberheuser's post-prison fate and its impact on the global code of medical ethics, the Nuremberg Code. Investigators, we have reached the bitterest point in this story. Herta Oberheuser was sentenced to 20 years in prison for unimaginable crimes. However, as is often the case in war crimes cases, the justice promised in court often does not match the reality. In 1952, just a few years after her sentence was handed down, Herta Oberheuser was released. She was released on the basis of good behavior and a post-war amnesty. For the survivors of the Rabbit Girls, who have to live with the physical scars and profound psychological trauma for the rest of their lives, this premature release was a harsh slap in the face of justice. After her release, Herta Oberheuser did the unthinkable. She didn't disappear. She didn't hide. She returned to her profession. She moved to Stocksee, Germany, and most shockingly, she opened a general practice, later focusing on pediatrics. This is the infuriating question we as investigators must confront. How could the hands that took lives and planted shards of glass then touch babies and children to heal them? She worked for years, in silence, hiding behind her new image as a respected doctor. No one knew, or perhaps no one wanted to know, the dark history behind her neat white coat. However, the truth never fully dies. In 1956, a Ravensbrück survivor happened to recognize Herta Oberheuser, now a prominent pediatrician in her community. The news exploded. Public pressure and international outrage forced West German authorities to act. Finally, in 1958, Herta Oberheuser was officially stripped of her medical license. This was the only real punishment she experienced outside of prison. She spent the rest of her life in enforced sobriety. Herta Oberheuser died in 1978. Her death marked the end of an individual who once had brilliant potential, but chose a path of cruelty. This is the saddest conclusion of our entire investigation. The victims spend the rest of their lives with incurable physical and psychological scars.
while the perpetrator spends most of his life with a new name and status in a freedom he did not deserve. However, Herta Oberheuser's dark story left a lasting, positive legacy: the Nuremberg Code. The crimes she and her colleagues committed forced the world to create strict ethical standards. The Nuremberg Code stipulated that the patient's voluntary consent in medical experiments was absolute, a fundamental principle that did not exist when Oberheuser committed her crimes.
The case of Herta Oberheuser reminds us that monsters don't always hide behind scary masks, but often behind the most perfect smiles and the most honorable titles. This is a tragic story of how ambition, when it loses its moral compass, can destroy humanity. Investigators, after reviewing all the evidence, what is the most important moral lesson you learned from the story of Herta Oberheuser? Share your reflections in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe to support more in-depth historical investigations like this.